Well, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Oh, y'all got to do better than that. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you guys so much for joining us for the Robbins Regional Outlook. Today, you just saw from our host, Houston Healthcare, and our series sponsor for our Outlook series, Parish Construction Group. I have to thank Sarah Murph, our chair, for today happening. We were doing an Outlook annually from 2014 to 18, and then we're kind of lumped in with the Outlook that many of you attend with the Terry College of Business in Macon. After the last couple of years, we realized, you know what, we have a unique story that needs its own platform, and we need an opportunity to shine a light on the great things driving our economy and our future here in Houston County. And I'm so thankful. This was one of Sarah's goals for this year, was to bring it back. And your attendance today is a testament that we need to keep this on the radar, and you are in for a treat from our presenters today. But we're going to open things up the way we like to do things here in the Robbins region, and that's with a word of prayer. And I've asked our chair-elect Michael Collins to come lead us in the invocation and pledge. So if you will at this time, make sure your phones are silenced and stand with us as we go to the Lord in prayer.
Good afternoon. Let's pray. Great Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, we thank you for this day. We thank you for this community. Every good gift and perfect gift we know comes from you. So Father, we thank you for the food that we've already enjoyed. May you bless it to our bodies. May you bless the hands that served it. May you help it nourish us to serve you better. Father, we pray that as we look at our economic outlook today, that we will be able to see the opportunities that lie behind the challenges. Help us to make wise decisions that will benefit both our community and our region at large. And help us in everything that we do and say. Glorify you. For it's in Jesus Christ's name we pray. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You may be seated.
Our Outlook has additional sponsorship provided by Middle Georgia State University and our session sponsor for today, the Bank of Dudley. At this time, I would like to ask my good friend Anthony Hayes, the Vice President of the Bank of Dudley, to come forward at this time for some sponsor remarks. Please join me in thanking all of our sponsors for their support of today's program.
Good afternoon. As the newly appointed Houston County Market Leader, I'm excited to hear about the many things that are going on here in Houston County. I'm excited to bring this economic outlook back into Houston County. I would like to introduce to you our CEO, Sam Bell, but before I do that, I'd just like to acknowledge our team that is here from the Bank of Dudley. If you all would stand real quickly. And with that, I'll ask Sam Bell just to say a few comments.
Thank you. It's good to be here. The first thing I would say is I am so pleased I'm at an event that still says the pledge and has prayer. Amen. We're glad to be here. We're Bank of Dudley. You're going to see some of our advertisement, and it says since 1905. And the first thing I want to tell you is since 1905 is not a marketing jingle that myself or Piper McAfee, our marketing officer, came up with. Since 1905 is our culture. We've been there 118 years. We've been a community bank, and it's been through relationship banking. This is going to sound a little old-fashioned, but you know, we survived. We were one of two banks in Lawrence County that survived the Depression. We have survived 2 world wars, the boll weevil, the pandemic, the 2008 real estate crisis, and we're still here. We have branches in Lawrence County. We have one in East Dublin, and Dudley. We have a branch in Twiggs County, Jeffersonville, Georgia. Most recently, we opened a branch in Monroe County and Forsyth. and it's a temporary branch at this time. We'll be building a new facility. If you're familiar with Monroe County, just behind the post office, there's a city block there, kind of between the post office and the First Baptist Church. So we'll be breaking ground on that, hopefully in the next 30 to 60 days. And most recently, we had an opportunity to hire this guy right here, Anthony Hayes. So I guess the new announcement for us is we'll be opening an LPO here in Houston County, probably in the next 30 to 60 days. So that's what I have to say. We're glad to be here. We will be an active part of the community, just as we are in Lawrence County, Twiggs County, and Monroe County. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. And now we will move on with our program. At this time, I would like to ask for our chairman of the Robbins Regional Chamber Board, Ms. Sarah Merv, to come forward and introduce our presenters today.
Good afternoon. I'm so happy to be with you all today. As April mentioned, when we spoke at the end of last year about my year as chair, I told her that my top priority was to bring this event back. So I'm so excited to be here and to see this crowd. Obviously, you are interested in this information too. When I told April that I wanted to have this, I never imagined that we would have a representative from the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, but I'm so honored to introduce to you Mr. Michael Christ. He is Vice President and Regional Engagement Officer for the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta's Corporate Engagement Division. In this role, he serves as the Atlanta Fed's lead public engagement officer, focusing on smaller cities and towns. He shares this information that he gets from the rural areas that he communicates with back to the bank's senior leaders and other policy experts throughout the Atlanta Fed to deepen understanding of the district economy. Christ is a member of the National Association of Business Economists and the Atlanta Economics Club, where he served as president from 2015 to 2017. He also previously served on the advisory board for the Michael J. Coles College of Business in Kennesaw State and the board of the Georgia Council on Economic Education. A native of Cleveland, Ohio, he is married to Maxine, and they have 5 children and 3 grandchildren. Thank you, Mr. Christ, if you'll come to the stage.
Usually there's circus music playing whenever I come by stage. This is a nice change.
We have that.
You can see it up for next year.
Yeah.
It's really it's great to be back here in Central Georgia. The Atlanta Fed's ties with this area are quite deep. Actually, let me say something about the next speaker real quick. So it was about 10-15 years ago. We recognized in Atlanta, in our research department where I worked at the time, that we had no real idea of what was happening throughout our own district. We were pretty good at understanding what the big picture was, but we didn't understand what was happening on the ground in our communities, the ones that we were supposed to represent and serve. But we also realized that we couldn't be everywhere all the time, so we did what all good economists do, is we tried to find somebody else to do our work for us. And we reached out to a number of universities around the Southeast, and the first one that I talked to was actually Macon State down in Middle Georgia. And got to know Greg, came down, visited him, and he's been a great contact since then. If we ever want to know what's happening in Central Georgia, Dr. George is the one that we talk to. And I'm saying that not only because it's true, but because you're coming up after me and I don't want you saying anything bad. So we have been to Warner Robins and Macon several times. The photograph you see there is our current president, Raphael Bostic. He took a tour of the base a few years ago. And the smaller pictures that you see up there are related to a project that I'm involved with now, reaching out to smaller towns, rural communities, as Sarah was saying, to just listen to how people are experiencing what's happening in the economy, to explain the Federal Reserve and its policies. So if you are from any of these smaller communities and would like to have me back to speak to a Rotary Club or a Kiwanis group, that would be great. Bank of Dudley, the cities that you mentioned, they're all on my list of places that I really like to get to, so maybe we could talk later. So our agenda for today, I'm going to talk kind of broadly, kind of the national picture about overall economic activity. We'll talk about inflation, employment, spend a few seconds on Federal Reserve policy, and end with kind of just an overview of the outlook. So where's the economy today? This is a chart, we call it our Candy King chart. Every chart has a name. When you get to be as big a nerd as I have, worked at the Fed for 30-something years, every chart has a name. But it breaks down the components of economic growth for the U.S. economy into the main categories: consumption, investment, net exports, and spending, government spending. And the biggest, the most important of these components is consumer spending. It accounts for about 70% of our overall economy. And you can see from the first half of this year, the first half of last year, things slowed down a little bit. Stronger second half. In the first quarter of this year, that blue bar, consumption, private consumption, really held up. And it was a bit surprising because the Federal Reserve, as you know, had been raising interest rates for some time. Consumers were still spending. And we're starting to see some signs of a slowdown. Really, the early data from the second quarter of this year, oops, I went too fast, really show, well, let me go there, show a slowdown. The chart on the left is retail sales for the U.S. economy, and this chart goes through March. We actually had April data that came out yesterday that showed an additional slowdown. So that year-over-year percent change in retail sales that you see in that chart actually fell below 2% for the first time in a very long time. So what we think we're seeing here is this post-pandemic consumption boom is coming to an end for a couple of reasons. One, I mentioned higher interest rates. Also, there was money in the economy that wasn't spent during the pandemic. That money seems to be being spent or has been spent and is running out. There was a number of stimulus programs that added funds into the economy. Those seem to be drying up. And the mortgage refinancing boom and, again, the impact of higher interest rates are finally being felt. That Ohio State sticker that you see up there, let me explain that real quick. Consumer confidence, which is the right-hand chart. The best measure that we have comes from the University of Michigan, and as you heard, I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. Nothing good ever comes when you say nice things about the state of Michigan if you're from Ohio. So great, but look, great school. We just hate the football team, especially because they beat us the last couple of years in a row. Anyways, but so retail sales have slowed. Now consumer confidence is showing some signs of slowing as well. This is a chart from a survey that we do, and I'll talk more about that survey in just a second. But we talk to businesses on a regular basis. They fill out the survey. It has a number of questions. Most of them focus on inflation, but one we ask about their sales level. You know, compared to normal times, how did your sales look? And you can see coming out of the Great Recession, things look pretty grim. And the pandemic impact you could really see jump out. And then the recovery pretty quick after the pandemic, but a definite slowdown since then. So we're seeing it in a consumer slowdown in the data. We're seeing it in what businesses are telling us, that that the consumer, the biggest part of our economy, is starting to take a step back. So when you think about overall economic activity, it does appear to be easing as 2023 goes on. So, inflation. You had one job, right? It's the Federal Reserve. That is our job, to keep inflation low and stable. We have what we call our dual mandate, so it's really two jobs. One, low and stable inflation, but also maximum employment. Inflation is still very high. It's largely because demand outstrips supply coming out of the pandemic. I think it caught pretty much everybody by surprise how strong the economy recovered coming out of the pandemic. But it is our job to keep inflation down. And we think the slower economic activity that we're seeing signs of developing is going to help with that regard. Getting supply and demand more in line with each other. Like the Federal Reserve can't do anything about supply chain issues. So from the supply side, you know, we wait for and we're seeing signs that that's starting to do better. From the demand side, we can do an awful lot about demand. We can take care of inflation very quickly if we wanted to. But, you know, those of us who are around in the early 1980s, not that I worked for the Federal Reserve in the early 1980s, or late 70s, but those interest rates were, 20%. It strangled the economy. That is not what we want to do. We're keeping an eye on both parts of our job to make sure that we don't crush the economy and kill employment at the same time, focusing on bringing inflation down. Inflation has shown some signs of moderating in recent months. It's still well above the Federal Reserve's target of 2% growth year over year. But you can see in this chart it's starting to come down a little bit. This measure represents kind of the broadest measure of inflation that we have. It's coming down, I think, more slowly than we thought it would, given the fact that we've went from nearly zero interest rates to 5% in just over a year. But we are seeing that it is starting to moderate somewhat. I mentioned that survey a second ago that focused on sales. It's from a survey we call the Business Inflation Expectations Survey. And inflation, I can't say enough about how important inflation expectations are, because they really drive consumers and business decision making. If you think inflation is going to be 5% next year, you're going to base decisions today on the expectation that inflation is going to be there. We want to make sure that we're doing all we can to bring those expectations down, to keep them low, and get them back to the Fed's 2% target. Because over time, if inflation expectations are 2%, what that tells us is consumers and businesses believe what we say when we say 2% is our target. The fact that it went up, it only went up to close to 4%. It's come down closer to 3%. Our credibility is based on us being able to bring inflation back down, and seeing that those expectations start to fall back towards 2% is a positive sign for us. And one of a couple of shameless plugs that I'll make: as you leave today, there's a little pamphlet outside on the table where you got your name tags. If you're a business that would like to participate in this survey, we'd love for you to join. The more information that we get about how businesses are expecting prices and wages and sales to be, the better we think we can make policy. So we're very, very happy if you would participate in that. Another inflation indicator is wage growth. Now, look, we are not against wage growth. I was talking to a group. Actually, it was some teachers from my son's school. He teaches economics at a school up in Atlanta, and he goes, one of the questions was, why are you so worried about wage growth? Isn't wage growth good? So, yeah, real wage growth is terrific when it's wage growth when you take inflation out. But if you're building inflation expectations into wage demands, what that could lead to is a wage price spiral, because you're having to pay workers more in wages. To make up for that, you have to raise your prices, and that ends up feeding through into the overall inflation rate. So seeing wage growth moderate is another positive sign for inflation. So when we think about inflation overall, it's inflation expectations are better than they were, but the overall rate of inflation is still well above the Federal Reserve's 2% target. I mentioned that employment was the other part of our mandate, making sure we're doing what we can to maximize employment. The unemployment rate, which is on the left-hand side of the chart, measured by the line, is the lowest it's been in decades, about 3.4, 3.5%. We're seeing payroll employment growth, the number of jobs that businesses are adding to their payrolls on a monthly basis, start to slow down. It's still very robust. It's still very strong. Again, given the fact that we're seeing some slowdown in the economy overall, the fact that rates have increased as much as they have, to see employment growth as strong as it is, it's really a positive sign, because like I said, we don't want to crush the economy in our quest to bring inflation back down. And if labor markets are staying healthy, are staying strong, if we're still adding jobs, if the unemployment rate is low, that tells us that we have a little bit of room to do what we need to do to slow down the overall economy without having a big impact on unemployment. But nonetheless, we are seeing signs that overall employment growth is starting to slow down. And we're hearing more and more businesses say that they plan to either freeze hiring of where they are, or start to think about laying people off. Part of the reason why the employment sector is so strong, the labor market is so strong, is because there's still a gap in overall demand for labor and supply of labor. And that gap really jumped out after the pandemic. You can see it really, the blue line is demand for labor, the red line is available labor resources. It is, we're not just seeing this in the numbers, this is what businesses are telling us. When I have the opportunity to go out and speak in public and I have to interact with businesses, last year around this time, really up until the holidays, the main focus was inflation. You guys got to do something about inflation, it's killing us, do something about inflation. I've heard very little about inflation so far this year. The main focus is back on this labor market. We can't find workers for the jobs that we have open. It is starting to get narrow slowly, but it's still quite wide by historical standards. So the question kind of begs itself, well, where have all these workers gone? We are seeing more people return to the labor force that were out from disability and those who went back to school. They're rejoining the labor force. I'm focusing on the left-hand chart right now. But we are seeing still a labor force gap because people are retiring earlier than expected. I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but I'm 58, and people that are my age are retiring, and it stuns me that they can do that. I still have a kid in school, maybe that's why I haven't thought about it. But the idea that you can, especially coming out of the pandemic, where I work, just talking about my own personal experience, a lot of people decided to hang it up because they didn't want to come back to work. And they could at the time. Now, whether or not they come back into the labor force over more time, we'll see. But we are seeing still retirements being one of the reasons, early retirements, why we still see that gap in labor supply and demand. We also are seeing that gap, family responsibilities, especially affecting women in the workforce, either child care or family care, difficulty finding child care. And I hear a lot of this in small town or rural areas, that the availability of child care is very difficult to get, or they have family responsibilities that are keeping them out of the labor force. And there's something called the shadow labor force, which is people that aren't really working for a company, they're kind of doing their own thing. And we're seeing more and more of that in the economy. It's very difficult to measure, but we know it exists. And there's some measurements that, in addition to this one, that show that. The chart on the right is the prime age labor force. Prime age is 24 to 54. Now that I'm not prime age anymore. I'm not in my prime. Nobody told me that, so I just realized that. But you hear, where are all these workers gone? Well, when you focus on the main body of workers, those in that age group, that level is back to where it was before the pandemic. So where have all the workers gone? Why is there still that gap? There's a number of reasons, but it's narrowing. And this, when you're looking for looking specifically at the prime age workers, the level is back to where it was before the pandemic. One other thing about that I read, but I haven't really looked at any data, is that it's not just overall labor force, but where these folks are working. So if you're in retail and restaurants, they're still looking for workers, but high tech and some other areas are not, because there was a shift, if you will, from different sectors coming out of the pandemic. I don't have any data that backs that up, but it's something that I hear more and more about, and I think it's worth looking into. So overall, when you think about the employment side, employment growth is moderating, but demand for workers still outstrips supply. And I think it's one of the reasons why you see the unemployment rate as low as it is. Here's a quote from my boss, Raphael Bostic, talking about how important it is to bring inflation down, and how he thinks it's still well above. It's still too high. It's above the target. And he gave a couple of interviews this week talking about how we're going to do what we can to bring it back down to 2%. At the meeting last week, the Fed raised its interest rate again, but it signaled also that they're going to pause. They're going to see the effect of this cumulative increase in interest rates. They're going to see if those trends that are pointing inflation back down are staying before they decide what the next move is. And President Bostic was asked in a couple of these interviews, and do you think the next move is up or down? Because the markets are kind of expecting the next move to be down. And he said, look, I'm weighted, as in weighted, not weighted, to the idea of another increase rather than a decrease. Because we're going to do whatever it takes to get inflation back down to 2%. We want to do it causing as less pain as possible, but that's our job, that's our goal, and staying on task is the primary concern of the Federal Reserve. So before I talk about the outlook, I put a picture of my puppy up there because I want people to remember not how wrong I am about the outlook, but how sweet my dog is. This is from not the last FOMC meeting, but the March Federal Open Market Committee meeting. Every quarter at the meeting where the Federal Reserve gets together and decides what to do with interest rates, where President Bostic has his say, along with Jay Powell and everybody else, they put their economic projections out. So these are a little stale, because they were done in March. And at the next meeting in June, these will be updated. But I think what really jumps out at me when I look at these numbers is that the expectation by the fourth quarter of this year, the unemployment rate is going to be 4.5%. Excuse me. We know it's 3.4% now. What would have to happen to get it to 4.5% is troublesome. I hope it doesn't happen. The inflation rate expected to be 3.3%. It's possible, but inflation would have to decline at a faster pace than it's declining now. And again, unemployment would have to rise much more significantly from current levels. So I think you'll see in the formal Fed outlook that'll come out next month some adjustment to those numbers. Can't really talk about an outlook without talking about risk to the outlook. The biggest risk, of course, is that inflation really doesn't moderate at a faster pace than it's moderating now. We see risk coming from the banking sector. We had a number of bank failures out west. The impact of what that means for credit conditions. Are we going to see a significant credit tightening? There's always credit tightening when interest rates go up, but are we going to see a bigger impact of credit tightening because of what's happened in some of these regional banks? We're not sure. But that is one downside risk. Another risk, of course, is the debt ceiling. Look, I work for the Federal Reserve. We stay out of politics. We're nonpartisan. We're apolitical. This is Congress and the administration's job to figure out. But if they don't figure out things quickly, it could have a serious impact on the economy. So just to wrap things up, overall economic activity is slowing. Inflation expectations are moderating, but it's going to take some time for us to get back to our 2% target. Employment growth also appears to be moderating, but demand for workers still outstrips supply. The Federal Reserve is on pause. We're going to wait and see what the impact of these year-long series of interest rate increases are. And like I said, we're going to assess what the impact of potentially tighter credit conditions are on the economy before moving forward. In the outlook, overall, slower growth, again, reflecting the cumulative impact of rate increases, credit tightening, and consumers that seem to be running out of steam a bit. Now, this is the second plug. And it's all, the third one is there's another brochure out on the desk. Why? You guys, I should have asked you before. April, sorry. Before.
You're good.
It's all free. It's all.
Music is coming.
Anyways, I've talked about kind of the broad big picture story, and local areas differ quite a bit. April, you said just a second ago that you have a unique story here in Warner Robins. Every local area has its own story. So I think it's a nice transition to ask Greg to come up and not forget that I said nice things about him when it's his turn to speak. So I'll turn things back over to Sarah, and then we'll go from there. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Christ. I hope that at least a few businesses in the room will participate in your survey, and that was a really, really informative presentation. We're proud to have you here today. For our next speaker, if you watched my Mid-Georgia CEO video talking about today, then you know this was one of my favorite professors when I attended Macon State, now Middle Georgia State University. So if that reference alone isn't enough, I will go ahead and read his bio for you. Dr. Greg George is a professor. The brochure says associate professor, but he recently received his promotion to full professor of economics and director of the Center for Economic Analysis at Middle Georgia State University. He received his PhD in economics and master's degree in resource management from the University of South Carolina and his undergraduate degree from the University of North Carolina. Dr. George has served as an expert witness conducting damage assessments and class action lawsuits around the nation and has been retained as a testifying expert by the Canadian government in their litigation versus the tobacco industry. He has testified before the U.S. Senate Subcommittee on Tax Reform and consults with municipalities regarding tax policy and budget issues. Dr. George serves as a senior fellow at the Georgia Public Policy Foundation, which advises the state government on taxes, budget, and economic issues. He is the chair of the Middle Georgia Economic Advisory Council, which is affiliated with the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta and updates that body quarterly on regional economic conditions. Dr. George, would like to welcome you to the stage.
Thank you, Sarah. I hope everybody can hear me okay. I've got a mic here so I can watch my slides while I talk. If I dip my head, it gets kind of loud, so I'll try to keep my head still. First of all, thanks, Mike, for your kind words, and Sarah, for your kind words. I appreciate that. I did have a lot of insults for Mike planned, and I'm still going to do them. But thanks for inviting me. I just did want to say that Mike was my first contact at the Atlanta Fed, I think about 10 or 12 years ago. And I had met Dennis Lockhart, who was the former CEO and president of Atlanta Fed, and he gave me Mike's card. Actually, he took my card. He said, "You'll be getting a call next week from Mike Christ because we want to talk to you about the economy." So we ended up putting together this council. It's been a very rewarding experience, and we're probably going to be getting back into doing some more of that going forward here. So when I was asked to prepare this, I happened to watch a YouTube video that said how to best do a presentation with PowerPoint. And they said use simple visual images, not bullet points, because you can help people visualize what's going on better with the image. Image tells 1,000 words, right? And so I thought about that, and for clarity and simplicity, I figured, well, I'll use some visuals. I noticed Mike had a lot of good visuals in his presentation. And so I found this as a simple visual about the future. And then they snaked it and used it for their title of this presentation here today. So this is totally plagiarized from the internet. I just grabbed this off of Google Images. It's a long run future, which basically says, in the long run, we're all dead. And it looks horrible out past 2050. So we don't really care about that. We care about the immediate future, the here and the now. And so that's my visual. That's visualize the future there. And then I'll get to my bullet points here in a second. And I would say this, that I would have more really good graphics like Mike had in his presentation. If my organization could have printed $8 trillion in the past 14 years, we could have afforded nicer pictures. We can't do that, but I did the math. And that's $1 million a minute for the past 14 years. That's a lot of yeah, but they're reversing course now. They're bringing it back down, so that's good. So let's go to bullet points. I think that's the last, maybe the last one. So when I do economic forecast, I like to look at where we've been in the past to kind of help us look at where we're at now, and so we can better project the future. So that'll be the basic outline of my presentation today. Where we've been and where we are now, and what we expect in the future. In January, I presented at the Terry School of Business Economic Outlook in Macon, and that was actually what got me this presentation gig. And I did the outlook there, and I think it's always good, Mike did this too, to kind of look at ourselves and see if in
in fact, we're on target. I did predict, like every other economist, that we were going to maybe be facing a mild recession. I also said that we were looking at maybe, I think the CBO was coming out with a report that said there'd be about 0% economic growth. And so that mild recession was kind of looming over us, and it never really materialized. We've kind of, maybe that zero growth, maybe that low growth environment has actually come to fruition. So as I was preparing for this, I looked and I was like, well, the mild recession hasn't really happened, but it's still kind of on our radar. And that kind of zero growth did seem to kind of materialize. And I came across this new term, rolling recession, which I might come back to at the end of this presentation, and see if that's what we might be looking at. That's a new term. It's not a classic economics term, but something I thought we could look at. A couple of disclaimers. The center that I run is an affiliate of the Federal Reserve, as part of the RAIN network, Regional Economic Information Network. That started, I think, when Mike came in with Dennis Lockhart, the previous CEO, president of the Atlanta Fed, and he wanted to reach out to communities, and so we put together a council and feeding them information. We revisited it during COVID, and we'll be doing some more with that in the future. The main disclaimer is everything that I say is my own opinion, and does not represent the opinion of the Fed. And this one also, this is an important distinction, and everything that Mike presented was actually very good, very well put together, and it represents kind of the trends in the nation. So when you're looking at the national economy, when you look at economic data, with all the releases of the CPI and the PCE and unemployment numbers, that 3.5% you heard, the 4-point-whatever% inflation numbers, core PCE, those are nationally generated numbers. But economies are very locally. I mean, we see that in Middle Georgia between Macon, Bibb County, and Houston County, Warner Robins. You can have vastly different economies taking place right next door to each other, irrespective of what's going on in the broader economy. So that's why we do these local forecasts. You like to kind of see what's going on in the nation, and then have a local presenter, me, come in here and kind of give you a little local flavor to it. So just be aware that what you do see in the nation, if I contradict something Mike said, it's because maybe there's something of different flavor here locally. Also, forecasting is difficult. Economists teach 3 different distinct methods of forecasting: technical, fundamental, and judgmental. Technical forecasting, also called naive forecasting, is more of a less a trend analysis, an objective analysis. You just look at the trends and you project them into the future. That's the simplest form. Because why? Well, trends tend to trend. So if something is going up, it will tend to continue going up until something dramatic happens. Fundamental forecasting is what you see a lot at the Fed. They've got all the big computers and all the high-paid economists that can generate fundamental reports, these scientific reports where they put together models and they predict things that we were talking about. A former employee who was big on inflation models and things like that, and they can really put those things together. Judgmental forecasting is more subjective, using your gut feeling and your intuition, if you will. I tend to stick with technical and judgmental forecasting when I present these kind of things, which means you're getting subjective naivete in my forecast. That's how that's going to play out. One other thing about forecasting being difficult, we used to be the Center for Economic Analysis and Forecasting. That was our official title when we started back in 2005. In 2008, I was being interviewed on Georgia Public Broadcasting, and I said the coming recession in 2007, 8, 9 was not going to be that bad. And so we got the F out of there. And now we're just the Center for Economic Analysis. Take that with a grain of salt. This is my last jab. In 2019, the Federal Reserve Bank in Chicago put together a symposium, and they asked 140 top economists what's going to happen in 2020. And this is in December of 2019, they had this. And they predicted 1.7% GDP growth. We actually contracted by 3.5%. They predicted 3.7%, very low, below natural rate of unemployment. Unemployment, we hit 13. They missed on every major indicator that you can measure because no one anticipated COVID. Like, no one anticipated shutting down the world's largest economy and the rest of the world, for that matter, for an extended period of time. It's never been done before. And it threw things off a little bit. There was a chicken massacre in 2019 because restaurants were shut down. We didn't eat chickens, and because the growth cycle of chickens is so fast now, which is kind of gross. They can grow from small to edible in like 6 weeks. If you don't eat them, you got to kill them. And so there's a million chickens which massacred during COVID. And potatoes. We potato genocide because no one's eating French fries during COVID either. So the point is, you can make as many predictions you want, but these black swan events can come up, and it just throws everything off. So where are we? Good news and bad news. First of all, Mike kind of went through a lot of some. We're actually on the same page here, and you might have heard some of these sentiments coming from him. Unemployment is still very low. Good news. It's easy to get a job right now. And in Houston County, it's actually below the national rate. Like I said, economies are very locally, but the numbers are national. So Houston County is well below. That's a significant percentage below the nation. That tends to be true in Houston County. You guys are always well employed here. You have a very active labor market. And so it's easy to get a job. Wages being up, Mike made reference to this. We've seen about 6% annualized wage increases right now. And so even though we are suffering through some inflation, when you get a job, you've got the extra income to offset that inflation. That's a good thing. Inflation was high, it's coming down. Like I mentioned, that it's not great, but it is moving in the right direction. And honestly, it's moving faster in that direction than I anticipated it would. I was kind of projecting that they weren't going to get a hold of it as fast as they have, but they've done a pretty good job. And interest rates, on the good news side, in the Fed's defense and in Mike's defense, for the past decade, everybody's been saying interest rates are too low. You've kept them too low. And then they raise them, and what's everybody saying? Interest rates are too high, right? And actually, you know, you look at the treasuries right now, from the 1 month maturity all the way up to the 30-year, you know, they're ranging 3 to 4 to 5%. There's a little bit of an inversion in the yield curve, but for the most part, interest rates are kind of normal. They've normalized interest rates to where they're kind of supposed to be. From a long run average, this is not a bad interest rate regime that we're in right now, except for the inversion in the yield curve. Once that gets straightened out, that seems to be good news. What's the bad news? Well, same stuff. Economists, what's the one-arm economist joke? We're always saying on the other hand. Well, here's the other hand. Employment is still very low. So what does that mean? Well, if you're an employer, it's hard to find workers, right? So there's always two sides of the economy, the supply and the demand side. And what's good for workers is not great for employers. It's very difficult to find workers right now. You know, jobs are going unfilled because they can't get the workers they need. That's going to be even a bigger problem in Houston County than it is nationally because of your exceptionally low unemployment rate here. So that's going to be a problem that we have right now. Wages being up, again, that's good for workers, it's bad for employers. That also channels its way back through inflation again, and we may get a second wave of inflation if we start seeing wage pressure push through to pricing pressure. And interest rates, even though, as I just mentioned, they're historically at pretty good levels right now. I mean, a 5% interest rate is pretty normal. 3 to 5% in the lower maturities of treasuries, things like that. I don't know if you guys remember back like in the 70s and 80s when you had 15% mortgages and things like that. 7% mortgages were kind of the normal for a long time, and we're kind of in that regime now. That being said, the bad news is interest rates, Mike mentioned this, they've increased from 0 to 5%. That's a very rapid increase over a year. And it's not like going from 10 to 15%. That's a 50% increase. Going from 0 to 5% is an infinity increase in percentage terms. So there's a little, I think that caught a few people off guard that we went so fast up with the interest rates. And that's probably the bad news there. And as I mentioned, maybe going forward, there may still be some need to increase them a little more. So what about some data for Houston County? What do we have here? Well, you see back there, we've got the COVID recession and the unemployment rate. And it's been low and steady. This is just unheard of. The economists like to see the unemployment rate somewhere around 4 to 4.5%. I think you saw that in the long run projections that Mike showed. There's a reason for that. We want 4% unemployment because, as I mentioned, when you go to hire people, you need a pool of available workers to hire from. When you're down at 3% unemployment, it's slim pickings. You just can't find the workers that you need. So below the national rate of unemployment, but that also means that the economy is going well. We've also had that great resignation of workers. It's a thing that economists are chewing on, and we'll just see how that plays out. Housing market hotness. You've got during COVID, you had the houses really flying off the market quickly, and that's stabilized. But those decreases are kind of baked in now, and so you still have a hot housing market, and new listings are down from a year ago. So the housing market's sitting out. It's getting, that could put some pressure on housing prices, which is also a big component of inflation when you measure inflation. So that's one thing to keep an eye on. Consumers with bad credit. One thing that Mike mentioned that I was really happy to see him mention was that 70% of our economy is personal consumption. Sometimes that's overlooked, and that idea of consumer confidence is a very, very important indicator that I think many people don't care about. They care about GDP, they care about inflation, they care about unemployment, but consumer confidence and the ability of consumers to carry out their function in the economy, which is a large percentage of the economy, is an important thing. And so you see that the percentage of consumers with bad credit is really low. It's down to about a third. So if you take a quick look to one person to the left of you and one person to the right, one of you has horrible credit. The other two are good. But that's better than it used to be, right? So that fits in with consumer confidence, and it's good to see that in Warner Robins, that you have this low level of bad credit. Employed persons, again, this idea of the talk of a mild recession in Houston County, what do you see there at the end? You see this trend tending to kind of trend upward. And what's that number of employed persons? That's people coming back to the labor market. We see that nationally, and we see it here locally. We're still kind of getting right back to where we were. We're not quite there yet. So maybe we're a little lagging behind the nation in that. We're going to see some more people coming in the labor market. But as long as that continues to happen, we should have more payrolls, more personal income, more consumption, and that should keep the local economy moving along. So even if we do enter a mild recession, it may be tempered a little bit here in Houston County. Private establishments, the creation of new businesses is an important indicator locally, and that's just on an upward trend and continuing. So I'm not seeing a lot of that slowdown that we might see nationally. Again, back on that theme of data is national, but economies are local. So what about the future? What about the outlook? Where are we headed? Bad news, the fact that Warner Robins and Houston counties has such a low unemployment rate, that's going to continue to keep the labor markets tight in the short run. And the lending market, as Mike said, we're going to see increase in interest rates. Possibly, I will give this one thing about the Fed. You can trust them when they say what they say. They mean what they say. And I've been saying this a long time about the Fed. People ask me, what are they doing? It's like, well, just listen to them. They'll tell you what they're doing. And they've got those two key variables that they're concerned about: unemployment and inflation. So they're dual mandate. It's what they are by design there to care about. And right now we have very low unemployment and we have relatively high inflation. There's a very simple prescription for that, which is to raise interest rates. And they said they're going to pause, they're going to sit back. They realize that they raised interest rates really quickly. They want to slow down, take a quick little break check on the economy, see how things are going. But if you see, all you have to do is watch those two variables, unemployment and inflation. If you see unemployment continue to be low and inflation continue to be above the long run average, then they will continue to do what they do, which is exactly what they've indicated, what Bostic indicated this week on TV. Wage inflation does become a big problem with inflation, because as wages go up, that transfers through into prices. So that's kind of the bad news thing, and again, that's something in Warner Robins you need to pay attention to. We see a lot of wage inflation because of the labor shortage here in Warner Robins. That could translate into more inflation, and again, that's going to spur the Fed to increase interest rates more, and that's tapping the brakes on the economy, and it can really slow things down. On the good news, eventually the labor markets will correct. The good thing about wages going up is that brings people out of retirement, brings people who are out of the labor force back into the labor force. It gets the labor force participation rate back up, and we expect to see that happen as well. And is inflation under control? I'm kind of happy with the results so far, with the raising of interest rates and the controlling of inflation. It's not where it needs to be, but it is moving in the right direction. So hopefully that will continue. We'll see during this pause that the Fed is in, something to pay attention to. Does that number continue to stay low where it is right now, or does it drop, or does it increase? That would be a big indicator of how successful their rate hikes have been. And the last thing I'd like to say is that this is a strong market for college graduates. What we've noticed here locally, both in Macon and Warner Robins, we're seeing there's a splitting of the labor market. You have, on one hand, a lot of the higher skilled jobs are in high demand. It's hard to find high skilled laborers here in the Middle Georgia region, and that might differ from the nation as a whole. On the contrary, the low skilled workers are starting to be more and more available. So we're seeing a split in the labor market a little bit. And what does that mean? Well, the demand for labor is in that high skilled area, which is what higher education is there to produce, is high skilled workers. So it's a good time for college graduates, and it's a good time to be going back to college to get the human capital and get those education skills that you need for an ever advancing job market. And that's what I got. Thank you guys for having me here, and thanks to Sarah, and I'll turn it back over to April now. Thank you.
Please join me in thanking both of our presenters for today's insightful outlook. I hope you all feel educated and equipped for the rest of the year, and as we move forward, continuing to grow business. You want me to sing? I'm just kidding. I don't know that one. But anyway, we appreciate your interest, not only in the programming that we have here, but building a brighter future for our community. As I look around the room, each and every, oh my gosh, you really do want me to sing. I don't know what's happening. But anyway, we'll just ignore that. I do have a couple of housekeeping items to let you guys know about. So several have asked about the glasses on the tables. Those are for you to take. Depending on how many lines you can read on that sign in the middle will determine if you need the readers with the stickers or the blue light glasses that you can use for your screens at work and at home. If you need to swap them out, or at least got some more in the back, if you don't see what you need available on your table, we want to make sure that you grab those, as well as the mini desk sets. And we'd love to ask you to leave your name tags on the table as well. If you will, I think the music is tied to the slide perhaps. Okay, we're not sure. So as you exit, there's another slide that's going to come up that's got a QR code on it that has all of the slides that were shared by our presenters today. You'll also receive that in a post-event email. We're going to include video footage from today, so you can go back and watch some of the highlights and share that information with your colleagues and friends. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you to our sponsors, and y'all have an amazing rest of your day.
Oh, here. I'm sorry.
Hey,